Today we are going to continue the Regulation G restricted guide series with Dialga. Now, Dialga is another one of those Pokemon that seemingly time and time again wants to be good. Very similar to Ho-Oh, this Pokemon wants to be good. It kind of has the stats to be good, and one of the biggest issues always was that you're wasting that big 120 in attack, right? You don't really need the attack. You have your 150 special attack. This 120 in attack could be much more valuable in a different set, right? And you're going to see that in Dialga Origin. I am going to utilize both of these Pokemon in today's video. There was no point in making two separate videos on a very, very similar Pokemon, just with a little bit of a different, one just holds a different item, long story short, and a little bit of a stat change. But there's no point in making two separate videos, so you're going to see both of them featured in this, and why I think Dialga Origin is a tad bit better if you do not need another item. However, we'll get into that when we get into set 1 and 2. But overall, Dialga is one of those Pokemon that's a big steel dragon type, and back in the day it was the Kyogre answer. People tried to use it as a Xerneas answer, it just wasn't, so it was really just a Kyogre answer, right? And when Kyogre was everywhere, it was pretty good, right? Now Kyogre obviously less around now, but it's still a big dragon type. Steel dragon is a very strong typing, always has been, probably always will be. And you also get the ability to terrestrialize. There's tons of options for Dialga here to be a defensive piece once again. And you get the ability telepathy, which helps a lot in Trick Room. Because what happens a lot of the time here is, like you've seen, or at least recently, we've seen this paired with Ursaluna and the Earthquakes, right? And you can just Earthquake beside your own Dialga at will. Because of telepathy, you can't get hit by it, and you're still hitting both of the opponent's Pokemon on the other side of the field. It feels like a really good option. Of course, you can explode beside it if you really wanted to. I mean, I don't recommend clicking explosion or self-destruct, but if the scenario, whatever team building you are cooking or coming up with requires you to click explosion beside telepathy, I mean, go for it. Telepathy allows you to do that. You get a bunch of coverage moves. Of course, you get your standard, your flash cannons, your Draco meteors, right? But then you also get stuff like Earth Power, Thunder, Thunderbolt, Fire Blast, Flamethrower, Ice Beam if you really wanted to, right? Power Gem if you wanted a rock move. There are tons of options. Aura Sphere too. I didn't say Aura Sphere. Blizzard, India, Terra, Ice, Blizzard, Dialga spam. Yes, no? Kyurem at home? Okay, anyways, besides the point. What I'm trying to say is there are tons of options for Dialga right now on the coverage aspect. My main concern is that teching coverage is a little less valuable than it used to be. Because back in the day, a Pokemon, if it was 4 times weak to something, it was 4 times weak to something. There was no, I'm going to terrestrialize out of that 4 times weakness and be safe in front of you now, right? So that does does hinder off of the value of some of these coverage moves. However, stuff like Earth Power is still just a very strong move, especially into the likes of Zamazenta. But overall, we're going to jump right into set 1. And we're going to start with the Adamant Crystal Dialga Origin. Now, if you want to use Dialga Origin, it has to be holding the Adamant Crystal. Now, we've seen items like this in the past. We've seen it on the Ogerpon masks. And just like the Ogerpon masks, you get that 1.2 times power to your Steel and Dragon moves in this case. And honestly, that at least it's not like holding an item for nothing. You at least have something from the item, right? And of course you get that origin form, and the biggest thing about the origin form is you take, like I was saying, that 120 attack stat and you put it into special defense. And to me, that is a massive difference. Obviously it's nothing like crazy or monumental, but it's enough of a difference, in my opinion, to justify holding that Adamant Crystal, right? Because you still get a little bit more of an offensive item with it, and you also get a little bit more special defense as well. It's kind of like, rather than just like holding an assault vest, you don't get any more offense from holding an assault vest, but you get a little bit more defense, and you get a little bit more offense this way, right? So a little more offense, a little less SPDF. But also if you go with something like a Life Orb, you get a little less offense, but a little more SPDF, right? So it's kind of like that neutral ground area. And I'm going to be honest, I haven't fully tested Dialga Origin at all. However, there's a lot of concepts here that I think are very, very strong. And once again, if you're going to get a boost to your Steel and your Dragon type moves, you're going to run Flash Cannon, Dragon Pulse, right? There's no reason to not run Flash Cannon or Dragon Pulse here. Now, granted, you could switch to like a Steel Beam if you are really looking for insane damage. Draco Meteor is never a bad option, right? You just drop Dracos. Like, that's really just up to your playstyle on whether or not you want this Pokemon to sit on the field and do damage over time, or if you want this Pokemon to sit on the field and absolutely drop a couple Dracos. I guess in theory you would never go Dragon Pulse and you'd go Roar of Time. But, like, that's really scary. Obviously, 150, if you're really looking to just, like, drop something, you can go Roar of Time. It is Dialga's signature move. My only problem is then you cannot move the next turn. And you're only 90% accurate. So it's still not, like, that consistent. If you're looking for consistent damage, it's Dragon Pulse. If you're looking for... I guess if you're going to go Draco, you might as well go Roar of Time. I don't know. That's probably, once again, still playstyle if you're okay not moving next turn. But I feel like that could backfire in a lot of scenarios. You know, like last turn of Trick Room. If I click Roar of Time, I can't set Trick Room the next turn. And that could be detrimental. That could be what makes the difference in an endgame, right? Whereas Draco, okay, yeah, I'll be at -2. But at least I can reset Trick Room if I need to. At least I can maybe protect if I need to, you know? Or pick off something at 2 HP if I need to. Right? I don't know. Draco Meteor feels a little better just because you don't have that waiting time. But obviously, Roar of Time, base 150, it's always a valid... It's always an option if you're looking to just drop something. Of course, I think you really want Trick Room on this piece. I think this piece gets a ton of value from clicking Trick Room. And I'm going to put it on the sets 90% of the time. It's just one of those Pokemon that deserves to have Trick Room. It can reset the game. Now, I'm not saying you're using this as your Trick Room mode. I'm not saying run a hard Trick Room team with Dialga. But I think you need to have it because you're going to get outpaced, right? Base 90 speed, you are going to be getting outpaced a fair amount of the time. I'm not going to be like, oh, you're always getting outpaced. But, you know, you're going to be getting outpaced. Those faster teams that want to prioritize Tailwind, you can Trick Room in front of, you know, and you get your 4 turns that way. I think it's very, very valid. Now, whether you want Protect or not, this is completely up in the air. This is, once again, a play style. This is, once again, a team-dependent decision. Do you need Protect? Do you want a coverage move? In my opinion, the best coverage move on Dialga right now is Earth Power. Hitting the Zamazenta is obviously not for like anything crazy amounts of damage, but still hitting the Zamazentas that tend to wall things out. You've got Terra Fairy, so you're not dying to the body press immediately. In fact, I've also built this spread to live a +1 body press from 156. They run Impish, right? Or whatever the boosting defense nature is. No, not Impish. Is it Impish? Yeah, it's Impish. Right? Either way, regardless, it lives the +1 body press from the Zamazenta, so they have to set up before you're really pressured to Terra. And I think that's massive, right? Yes, can I Terra Fairy out of the body press? Absolutely. Right? Yes, I can, but I don't always want to Terra Fairy. Sometimes that puts on a little bit of a pin. Sometimes they can just double up and then catch me on the Terra Fairy. It's not great, right? So if I don't have to Terra Fairy because I can live the body press, that felt like something of value. Now, granted, do I think this is the best set for Dialga? Absolutely not. I think these are just benchmarks I wanted to showcase for you guys. Once again, the biggest thing here was that body press survival from the Zamazenta, because it seemingly is living... It is seemingly winning tours. It is one of the more consistent Pokemon in the format right now. And I think that was something I wanted to showcase, that, yeah, you can do that. I don't think it's a necessity. I think on Dialga, a lot of the times, like you'll see in set 2, you can just afford to go 252, 252, 4. But getting back to this one here, it's really one of those ones where I hit what I wanted on the defensive side with that body press calc. I dumped 4 into special defense because I wanted speed. Because sitting at 110 just felt weird, right? Maybe I pair this with an option to go Tailwind, and then all of a sudden now I can outpace the Calyrex Shadow, right? And those Scarf Urshifus that are running around, right? Now, you don't need to have 12 speed. You could do this. You could go min speed. You could throw some bulk back up here, right? There is tons of options as to what you want to do with this speed, right? Like, you can go 0, but my problem is if you go 0 and you go quiet, right? You sit at 85, and that doesn't really slow you down. All that does is make you slower than some of the mediocre speed Incineroars right now. Granted, a lot of them are running max speed right now, but some of those middling speed tier ones, all this does is make you slower. Which, sure, you know, it's cool. I mean, if you 85 is the speed stat you want to hit, run it, right? I just feel like you get a little bit more value out of going modest, being able to use this thing in and out of Tailwind, at this exact stat right here. Like 12 is not a lot of investment, right? So I don't think it really hurts to have on the board here, you know? But other than that, like I said, the main calc here that I really wanted to showcase was this being able to survive that body press from Zamazenta. Is it important? Maybe not. Is it cool and is it something I wanted to showcase? Absolutely, right? Now, once again, you could probably drop that a little bit, maybe eat like a 6% or a 12% roll and go up to, and you do something along these lines, right? Maybe something along these lines, because then you're at least hitting your second stat bump on your special attack, and maybe that hits a little bit harder, right? I didn't do a lot of offensive calcs with Dialga. My big thing with Dialga, and how I always try to play Dialga, is always that bulkier piece that can dish out damage just solely off the fact that it has a 150 special attack stat. I think that's something a lot of people forget, that Dialga does have a 150 special attack stat, right? Everybody considers Dialga bulky, right? And its highest stat is that special attack, so why not utilize it, right? But I do think a lot of the times you get more out of a bulky build. But moving on, we'll go to set 2 right now. And set 2, I wanted to showcase something that could maybe kind of do it all, and Amoonguss right now, one of the biggest issues for Trick Room, right? You get into Trick Room and your sweeper gets spored. A lot of the Calyrexes are going Terra Grass to cover for that, right? They do not want to get spored. In this case, I don't really want to go Grass on Dialga. It doesn't feel like a great Terra for it. And I figured, okay, what if I had Safety Goggles, right? Now I have Safety Goggles. Now I flip the type chart with Terra Ghost, because if they try to close combat me or body press me, it's no longer effective at all. Obviously a little weaker to the Calyrexes, but if someone is trying to walk in and click Fake Out to stop my Trick Room, I can Terra Ghost and get my Trick Room up. If they are going to Fake Out the other slot and spore my Dialga, they can't do that either. I'm still going to get Trick Room up because of Safety Goggles. I can no longer get redirected, meaning my Flash Cannons and my Dragon Pulses are going to go exactly where I want them on the future turns as well, at least from the Rage Powders, I should say. Obviously, Follow Me will still be able to get around those Safety Goggles, right? But I think the big thing here is it just felt like, okay, if I'm looking at ways people stop Trick Room, I'm looking at Fake Out to stop Trick Room for a turn, and I'm looking at Spore to stop Trick Room for a turn, right? And those are two things that I can immediately shut down with one piece, with my Terra and my item, and that feels kind of good, right? Also, Terra Ghost probably just 1v1s absolutely will 1v1 a Zamazenta, especially if you're rocking the Earth Power variant, right? So now all of a sudden, my restricted, I can clearly see a line where in a vacuum, I have a 1v1. Ghost Dialga should be beating Zamazenta 90%, 99% of the time, unless you've already taken way too much chip, right? Because, if they are running the Heavy Slam, which a lot of them are switching over to right now, Heavy Slam does not do a lot to Dialga. Dialga is a very heavy Pokemon, right? And it's also not a common Pokemon, so there's no real reason for them to think about running Behemoth Bash for this exact instance, right? So I think Heavy Slam is the more common move there, and that's probably doing negligible damage if you Terra Ghost, and even with the Terra Ghost, right? But more importantly, like I said, this was I wanted to showcase something that could utilize an item because the Origin Form Dialga cannot, right? And I think Safety Goggles is a cool item. There's a few other options as well, right? You can go more offensive, maybe with a Life Orb, right? There is tons of options here on Dialga. I wanted to point that out. But I think Safety Goggles Ghost, if you're really looking to try and set Trick Room up with this piece, could be very, very cool and very, very strong as well. Once again, you can merge the sets from all three of these guys. There's nothing too crazy here. 252, 252-4. I mean, that's pretty basic, right? I mean, it works for Ice Rider. It can probably work for Dialga for the most part as well. You can fine tune it a little bit like I tried to do over here. Both pretty much work the same, right? Obviously, the special defense a little lower on this base Dialga, but it's the trade-off of having Safety Goggles and Terra Ghost to get Trick Room up and ignore spores that much better for you, perhaps, right? Set 3, pretty similar, and one that I actually don't think is going to be utilized too often, because back in the day, like I said before, you have coverage moves consistently, right? And having these coverage moves is amazing. However, like I said, they lose a little bit of value because it's not like, okay, well, I saved my Dialga for the Kyogre, I click Thunderbolt, I win now, because if I do that and they Terra Grass, I mean, granted, I'll still probably win because I have an Assault Vest and I'll out damage, but you get my point, right? It's not as clear cut with these tech moves anymore as to where you want to be utilizing them. Now, Something I do want to point out, Terra Fairy, Terra Blast could be a very cool option here. I didn't put it in the initial moveset because I did want to talk about it. But once again, Terra Blast, Terra Fairy, there are no offensive fairies in the game, guys. I mean, you have Fluttermane and Whimsicott. Those are the two most popular fairies in the game. Am I missing one? I might be missing one. If I'm missing one, I apologize. But, like, after that, there's not a ton of fairies. Even if I did miss one or two, that's still not a lot of viable fairy type to do damage, right? So I think tearing this thing to fairy makes a lot of sense because you are still going to be resisting that close combat or those fighting moves coming into you. You get a pretty good type matchup for an Assault Vest Pokemon, very defensive Pokemon. Doesn't hate being fairy type in general. Fairy is a very good typing. And then you just get to launch off those fairy attacks that are far and few between in the format, right? Now, obviously, do I think this set is amazing? I do not think so. I think Dialga really does appreciate having access to that Trick Room like I showcased in set 1 and 2. I also think Dialga gets a little bit better, like a lot of the restricteds do, when you're able to pair it with another restricted. Because right now, in what world am I going to justify using a Dialga as my restricted when the likes of Calyrex Ice exists, Calyrex Shadow exists, Terrapagos, Zamazenta, right? Those Pokemon are all better as a restricted slot. Even Kyogre too, right? They're all a better restricted Pokemon than Dialga, right? So justifying using Dialga over one of those is really, really difficult. However, I think if you're looking to look at Dialga, this is some of these are probably the way to look at it. And I think Assault Vest is very interesting if you could maybe pair this with maybe, I don't know, a Calyrex Ice. Dialga Cali Ice seems like the most unlikely core ever, but Cali Ice takes care of those ground types. Dialga comes in, is that second Trick Room setter, right? Does some cool things, right? Maybe something like that is cool. Dialga Kyogre has been something people have always tried to make work since way back when. That could be cool as well. And then, you know, I just don't think it's the time right now, especially for this Assault Vest variant. I do still think you want that Trick Room option. You want that option to be able to set the Trick Room, right? And Dialga appreciates that. However, I do want to look at the faster side of things really, really quickly here. This video is dragged on a little bit longer than I would have liked. But I want to look at the faster side of Dialga because you do have a little bit of speed, right? And maybe if you want to just go offensive or go with the base form and go like a Life Orb instead of doing this and needing the Adamant Crystal. Because if you are going offensive, it makes a little more sense to have, you know, you don't really need the bulk, and it makes a little more sense to get a better boost if you go regular Dialga. Right? You get more, technically. If you're going to go commit to offense, you get more from this Dialga, since you get to actually hold an offensive item that affects all your moves instead of just holding the one item that only affects your Dragon and Steel moves, right? So you technically get more that way. But really what I'm looking at here is kind of the speed stat, right? If you're sitting around 138 and that's going to be your benchmark, you're going to be outpacing the Iron Bundles when they go down to -1. That'll also in turn allow you to outpace those Fluttermanes, the Koraidons, everything else in that speed tier when they are -1. Right, so maybe you pair this with like an Icy Wind Fluttermane, right? Speed boosting Icy Wind Fluttermane could be very cool beside this Dialga here. And you just go on that more offensive approach, right? And this is kind of similar to what I was saying earlier, where everybody on Dialga sees a Dialga and it's like, it's fine, it's a bulkier piece, it's not going to really do damage. But people forget that this is a 150 attack stat Pokemon, and all of a sudden, this is going to start hurting, right? I make this thing modest, right? This is going to hurt, you know? Whatever move I click right now is going to hurt, right? Whether I go Flash Cannon, you probably go Draco on a Life Orb set as well, and you're just looking to delete pieces off the field at this point. I still think Earth Power is a very strong option as well. And then you're probably going to go with like Protect and forego Trick Room on a team like this, right? But these are kind of the benchmarks. This is kind of what I was looking at with that Life Orb Dialga, right? You probably want to sit around here in Special Attack. You can probably go up to about 179 there, right? And then you just dump it into here real quick, right? Nothing too crazy, right? Like you optimize the Life Orb chip. You can play around with the speed stat, right? Obviously 125 outpaces those max speed Incineroars into Serenas, right? You want to get out of it. You want to be outpacing those, right? You don't want to be slower, especially if you are a more offensive dragon type here. You definitely want to be faster there. So you could probably sit around here. You could technically go up to 129, outpace those timid Pelipers if you were looking for doing that, right? There's tons of speed tiers in here that are pretty solid, right? Now, granted, you could probably go ahead and just go max speed too, right? Now, 142 doesn't really get you anywhere, right? I don't love hitting 142. Like, I don't know what I'm getting from this. You know, it's there. It's kind of cool. I don't really get much outside of maybe speed tying those max speed adamant Kyogre or max speed modest Kyogres that are running around that I really haven't seen. If they're running around, cool. But, you know, I think Dialga is a cool Pokemon. There's a lot of options you can do with it because you have incredible amounts of tech moves. You have a 150 special attack stat, right? Like, the Pokemon is very, very strong inherently. It never finds value in the format, and it's a little weird. But I think overall, if you are gonna run it, I would personally start with a set 1 with the Dialga Origin, and then if you find yourself needing an item, I would explore the other 3 Dialgas, right? If you find yourself needing an item that's not Adamant Crystal, I would start exploring into a different option, right? But I really do think that you're fine with the trade-off that you get from Adamant Crystal. You know, you get a little bit of a special defense boost, you get a little bit of an offensive boost on your stab moves, and that just feels pretty good to me, right? Now, granted, like I said, if you're looking for that item, something else making yourself more serviceable in different matchups, go ahead and switch to the other Dialgas. But I am going to stop talking about Dialga now. I've gone on way longer than I wanted to. Probably rambled a little bit. But guys, I think Dialga is interesting. I think it's definitely a fun mod to build in this format, but that's where I think it stops. I don't think it's really going to see too much success in the current format, but I could definitely see it creeping around in a double restricted format where it is your second restricted as opposed to your only one, right? But with that, I'm going to get on out of here. Thank you all so much for watching. If you guys do enjoy the video, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel. But with that, I'm going to get on out of here, and I will catch you all in a future video.